I need some traction. You need some traction.
Welcome everyone to another episode of our Traction webinars. Today we've got a great guest. Jennifer Vancini is a founder and a general partner at Mighty Capital. She's a Silicon Valley venture capitalist at a firm that invests in early growth companies that can drive value at scale. She has 25 plus years of experience across a broad range of technologies with extensive experience in mobile, enterprise, and security industries. Jennifer has held executive roles in startups, innovation units of large organizations, including Pricewaterhouse, Certicom, Symbians, which was Nokia, and Telefonica, and brings her business and corporate development experience to her investments and board roles. Now, that's the official bio.
The official
Jennifer,
bio, yeah.
Please tell us about you, about Mighty Capital, and why you got into venture.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. First, I'm really thrilled to be here talking about a subject I basically built my career around, and that I get to practice every day in venture capital. You just asked, why did you get into venture capital? Well, I've always loved investing. When I was in high school, I went and opened a Dean Witter account so I could buy individual shares of stock, even though I was only earning $2.35 an hour in my fast food jobs. So I've always loved investing. As my career grew and migrated, and I found myself in a position where I could start investing more seriously. And I looked at what I wanted to do next after a long career in ecosystem development, business development, corporate development. Of course, venture capital is very appealing. To be able to be an investor and really help drive the growth of companies and new economies and participate in the upside. So I just love the variety and understanding how a company fits in the broader system and network.
Cool.
That makes it short. And, and at Mighty Capital, you did a good intro. My bio included an intro to Mighty Capital, but we invest typically in like Series A, Series B companies, early growth.
And fairly new.
Fairly new. We're deploying our second fund now. We invest maybe 70% in B2B tech, about 30% in personalized medicine, health tech. We're expanding, fintech as a market. And what differentiates us, and one of the reasons I got really excited about Mighty, is that we're able to give our portfolio companies access to a network of more than 300,000 product managers and experts through our sister network called Products that Count. And so we're able to help turn product managers into customers and champions for our entrepreneurs' companies. So it fits into that whole, how can Mighty Capital be bigger by having this ecosystem partner that gives us an edge, gives our companies an edge.
So being able to really help in an active role
Yes.
in the development and growth of your portfolio. So I just got a note here. People are asking, who the hell am I?
So, right, yeah. Who are you? Where's Lloyd, right?
I'm not Lloyd. My name's Ray Walia. I'm co-founder of Traction with Lloyd. I'm also the co-founder CEO of Launch Academy and Launch Ventures based out of Vancouver, Canada, investing around the world and building startups and ecosystems. Today we're here to talk about ecosystems and not the typical ecosystem that everybody thinks about. We're talking about the ecosystem centric around your company, and it's more than just community. But before we get into that ecosystem, I want to know what is exciting about 2021 for you and Mighty Capital, especially coming out of COVID.
Yeah, so what's exciting, one, it's not 2020, although paradoxically, it was a really good year for us at Mighty Capital. I mean, March and April, we weren't sure what to expect, but our portfolio ended up being in a very healthy position, balance sheet wise. There were several follow-on rounds. We made several new investments. So it's been very strange in venture capital, K-shaped recovery perhaps, but quite still a lot of opportunity and a lot of growth. I think one thing I'm looking forward to is doing more investments. We have just finished raising the second fund despite COVID. So we've made 2 investments, really working on deal flow and pipeline, and excited for that. And there will be more growth areas as the fog lifts and companies start to spend again and invest outside of the few things we've seen stay very strong.
Yeah, and with a lot of the news about the vaccine, new government, people are seeing a lot of light at the end of the tunnel, and a lot of that ramp up and getting back to business as usual is centric around your customers and building your community and getting things rolling again. But a lot of times people think about community as just customers, but there's these micro communities, microcosms that all together build an ecosystem around your business. And so explain to the audience what ecosystem means to you and how it defines the company.
Okay, so what is an ecosystem? We understand it in nature, and it's a word we use a lot, especially in Silicon Valley, but it's basically a complex network or interconnected system in which there's some exchange of value. There's a reason to interact outside of yourself. But in this context, in the business context, we're starting with you, your company. Your core company is at the heart of your ecosystem. And we'll talk a bit more about why that's an ecosystem in and of itself. Then your system gets bigger as you engage with companies directly adjacent to you and players adjacent to you. And then, the indirect contact, who are those people related to, further removed. So ecosystems tend to grow as a company grows over time. And I think that's really important because it can help a company, especially in early stages as it grows, accelerate their growth, accelerate hitting their metrics, give them more leverage, make them look bigger than they are, and just mature a lot more quickly. And generally, you have an ecosystem, whether you realize it or not. Its size, its members, its attributes, they're a mix of both strategic and organic activities, or coincidences. Serendipity is a huge part of who's in and out of our ecosystem. And I guess what we'll talk about a lot today is how you can be more mindful and strategic about how to develop that, manage it to meet your strategic goals. So in this graphic here, every time I look at it, I can think of other things to add around the ring here. But your company is in the middle of this solar system. And when we as an investor look at who your company is, we're not just looking at the team, we're looking at the whole package there. So it's your team, your investors, your board, your advisors, your mentors. There's probably some other categories here you could include. We'll ask, how involved are these people? What value are they bringing? But even, one step beyond that, more indirectly, all those people have their own networks, even spouses and children and partners who, when you live in a tech hub center and innovation center like Silicon Valley, Toronto, Vancouver, Austin, Seattle, this is where the serendipity can come into play. I was at the dog park yesterday talking to somebody who may be able to give us a potential deal lead, for example. So it's a friend of mine, a neighbor. So we all have other people within our networks that actually make up our ecosystem, and the extent to which we tap into that to get value really varies. But I think just being aware with what you have to start with today is really helpful and advisable. And then when you look outside of your company, that becomes part of that complex interconnected network. There's so many things. Of course, we're always thinking about customers, really key part of your ecosystem. Companies, as they grow, especially invest a lot more in the go-to-market partners and how to go to market. And we can talk about that. Competitors are in your ecosystem. Co-opetition, the moves they make might affect the moves you make, affect your customer base. There's this aspect of government, especially in certain industries, standards bodies, associations that say your company has a seat at the table in a particular industry. The big market makers are part of your ecosystem. You're probably engaging with them in your particular segment, your verticals. Academia and accelerators I lump together because there's some similarity there and overlap, but that's certainly a huge part of where new companies are born, and where people go to find mentorship and build their initial network, especially first-time CEOs.
Yeah, I always say academia and accelerators, their objectives are all the same, but the execution is different. So yeah, I definitely see how they can definitely be lumped together.
Yeah. Without making too big a graphic here, right? So your vendors and your suppliers, right? Are you an Azure company, an AWS company, a DigitalOcean company, for example, or, are you using Gmail? Are you on Carta? These things are actually part of your ecosystem and define a little bit who you are and your culture. Your service providers, your lawyers, your accountants. it's also part of who your company is and your team. What I didn't include here, I'm not sure where it would fit, but certainly your local community and where you're based is part of it, and where you've decided to put your office. Part of the appeal of share spaces like WeWork and Spaces is companies, especially early on, wanting to meet other companies and get a bit of synergies going. So hopefully that sets the stage. You think I missed anything here, Ray? I always think of new ones when I sit down.
Yeah,
and
no, you touched on something right there about where you're located, because being based in say Silicon Valley, as opposed to Vancouver, as opposed to Miami, the way that your ecosystem functions and your business is able to execute will change. And now add in other markets like Nigeria or Vietnam, that's just an emerging market, and companies that are big fish, small pond will be able to function very differently in those markets, as opposed to when they come to Silicon Valley, they have to function in a very different way and build their ecosystem accordingly. One thing I would touch on is we automatically think about community managers managing customers or managing that network. But each one of these elements is a community on its own.
Yep.
That all have symbiotic relationship with each other that then builds that ecosystem. But some of these things just happen organically, and you don't have a conscious methodology of how to build it. It just happens organically, like your vendor network or even your service providers. The early days, picking, okay, we're going to be an Azure company or AWS company, starts defining what that ecosystem will look like. Or are we building on Rails, or are we building on other tech platforms? Again, influences what that ecosystem is going to look like.
Just think even 10 years ago, right? More than that, bring your own device to work was really, I want a Mac. That's what that was really about, right? And it became part of the culture of, will you give me a Mac notebook? Can I use a Mac, or do I have to use, sorry, Microsoft, but do I have to use a ThinkPad, so.
That's a great segue, because that's what I'm kind of getting to is that how does culture affect ecosystem, and how do they influence each other?
It definitely has an impact, on culture, because these people, come in and out. So you start sharing or cross-pollinating cultural norms and approaches to things, can certainly learn from each other. Some big examples, I guess, when I was at Telefonica, huge, massive network operator going through digital transformation, like many others in the communication space, had Telefonica Digital and an office here on purpose to do some of that cultural cross-pollination, to infuse the attitudes of innovation and growth and entrepreneurship. And it affects stuff like the design of the office space, the snacks, Madrid, nobody got free food in Madrid, but, we had some snacks, and how people dressed when they would come visit here from Spain went from the 3-piece suits down to t-shirts over time. So, and on the flip side of that, a small, young, hip startup that wants to sell to a big enterprise like a Telefonica, Verizon, and a bank, they sometimes have to up their level of professionalism in terms of the way they deal with customers, speak to customers, present themselves. So there definitely are cultural influences. And we certainly consider that when we're picking brands for suppliers and who we're going to partner with, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And so looking back 15, 20 years ago, people understood culture, but they weren't making a concerted effort to build culture. And now with ecosystems, it's the same thing. A lot of times, like your vendor ecosystem just happens organically. You don't put a lot of time and energy into it, whereas opposed to the customer community, you're going to spend a lot more money on it. But what you're trying to get your portfolio and entrepreneurs to think about is constantly looking at building each one of those communities into an organic ecosystem.
Yeah, and how it impacts everything, including culture, which we know now drives so much of a company's path. Kind of an interesting example there. As a venture capitalist, part of our ecosystem are our limited partners. And we do an offsite once a year, and we had one, the last in-person one was 2019, but we actually had a breakout session talking about what kind of culture do we want at Mighty Capital, with considering our LPs as part of our team, part of our core company. And we talked a lot about cultural values and attributes with that part of our ecosystem.
When you're talking about these different stakeholders and recognizing the value that they can bring, how does that evolve as a company grows? Like your team is going to grow. And
Yep.
so bringing in new executives or other senior people, they have a community or they've got an ecosystem that they're bringing with them. How do you proactively look at uh, being strategic, not just with your hires, but how they can influence the ecosystem that you're building or want to build?
That's perhaps part of the culture, right? Part of our culture is to always be externally facing and just cognizant of these opportunities. I think at a really high level, the nature of your ecosystem is changing constantly, probably at a micro level on a daily basis. But over time, it certainly changes and grows as you add funding rounds, add customers, hire more employees, open new offices, bring in new technologies, so on and so forth. I think to the extent you can map, certainly when you're building an ecosystem strategy, you need to map your goals to the corporate strategy. Um, how will this help drive revenue, reduce costs, help us meet M&A partners, which we're interested in as investors? How will it elevate your employees? So it really should map to your strategy, and then to those particular activities of making people mindful. Even customers, huge part of our ecosystem. It's surprising. I was talking to a sales trainer recently who said he's surprised how many of his clients do not actively work with their customers on referrals to other customers in an effective manner. And that's an ecosystem to tap into, and they're usually very willing to help. I think it does become part of the cultural norm, something we're so used to here in Silicon Valley, but having worked in other areas, there's a bit of a learning curve of, hey, let's start with an awareness of what an ecosystem is, what our status quo is, and think creatively about, well, what's there that's not quite transparently in our face, but we just have to scratch the surface. And we see, rich resources to get intros to target customers, other investors, strategic go-to-market partners, and so forth.
And I think a lot of times, so it's easy for me to kind of look at it from an outside Valley perspective to an in-Valley perspective, because we work on both sides of the border. But what's happening in the Valley of this conscious knowledge of how to build an ecosystem is just getting realized outside the Valley. A lot of these things happen organically, but you're missing out on opportunities to really build a strategic advantage for your company or a deeper integration with the channel partners, vendors that build your business. And
you want that organic growth, but you can get so much more impact if you have a strategic aspect to it as well, where you intentionally select who to partner with. Right? As companies grow, the go-to-market partners are a huge part of the focus, right? And so, as the ecosystems grow and change, one marker, if there isn't enough growth and activity there, it can be an indication that the company is getting stuck, that they're not going to grow to the next level. If there's too much activity, too much going on, it looks like lack of focus, lack of strategy, waste of resources. So it's important to find that middle balance of energy and activity that really sent your company in the right direction.
That's one of the hardest things about entrepreneurs, to say no or hold back on certain things.
It's very hard to say no to, maybe a really large company that wants to do a proof of concept, and it could be millions of dollars down the road, but it's going to send you in a certain direction and cut off other options potentially, right? Yeah. So you need to be able to evaluate those opportunities.
So we get a question here. What are your thoughts on product-led community as part of the barrier to entry?
Well, since we're aligned with products that can, we think the best product wins, and product-led growth is super essential. And product is more than technology, of course. The product managers in the audience understand that, that it's everything and how it gets to market. We think product-led growth is key, because it really, if it's going to grow, you've got a value proposition, you're addressing pain points, you're achieving product market fit, which is such a key priority to be able to grow to the next level. And product-led growth could be in terms of how you build your partnerships. Who do we want to partner with for integration so that there's more added to our product? What do we want to buy in terms of talent, acquiring technology teams and so forth. So product-led growth around those. And we think product managers have quite a lot of influence and say in terms of where business development people in an organization are focused, for example, on what kind of partners to do. Maybe that's a good point. Why don't we dive a little deeper into the kinds of go-to-market partnerships that you can develop as a company, and as companies mature, you go from least complexity to high complexity in terms of deals, right? The easiest, like I said, customer referrals, integrations, which should be driven by what gives you the best product positioning, how can you get the most customers, drive the most revenue, joining or creating cookie cutter partner programs. Back in the 90s, Checkpoint did an awesome job of that with OPSEC. Checkpoint, big firewall leader, VPNs. They created their own partner program for integrations to put everybody under their umbrella. Great way to start creating a category that you own and define, right? Early on, you're usually the one joining rather than creating. Joining the marketplaces, Salesforce, App Exchange, of course, Apple, all the mobile marketplaces, that's part of go-to-market. Channels, huge area of focus. When does the CEO stop selling? And then the sales team stop doing their direct sales. When is the right time? And what are the implications to have referral selling, co-selling, indirect sales, OEM, white label sales? That's where your teams start getting bigger and how to really execute on those deals, how to prioritize those deals. Some fun ones can be product and service bundlings, like go-to-market projects. We see this in gaming all the time. My son, 6th grader, loves to game. So I keep hearing about the collabs between brands and gaming. So that, those can be really fun partnerships.
Those are models that are definitely repeatable in outside of gaming.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. When I was at Telefonica, we did a lot of that. I did a deal with Evernote to distribute Evernote across Latin America, which was a really great, fun project. That was basically a joint go-to-market thing, and drove millions of new users for them, and created stickiness for Telefonica. So we each got a benefit for our business. Getting more complicated, you can do joint projects or POCs, which are sometimes necessary when you're really in bleeding edge new technology segments. I had the privilege to manage this complicated project. When was this? Late 90s, again, combining internet, e-commerce, smart cards, digital signatures with about 10 different players just to prove technology works. We had the US Treasury, MasterCard, Zions Bank, Schlumberger. These are very rare and unusual, but we all were doing it because we were trying to further this huge new frontier of business, and we wanted to get our encryption technology standardized by the US government, the ANSI standards. So you have to prove this stuff. These are things you don't do very often, though, and they take years to do, and they can be very resource intensive.
Yeah, I would actually, just to chime in with my experience, like you're talking about introducing brand new technology to the world or to the masses or to stakeholders. We're working in the sports world, and we're taking technology that's proven and validated in other industries, but trying to bring it to the sports world with one of my portfolio companies is a daunting task because their mindsets are so old school. They're not embracing these new technologies, especially in the back end office where we're focused on with contracts and player data. But it's a huge opportunity if you can do it right.
It is, and it for all the that was an ecosystem, I guess, of 10 companies, big resource intensive, but we all, by creating, kind of helping shift technology for the US government to even look at e-commerce. I actually bought $50 on the internet, like with the smart card in 99. It was just to prove it out, to change people's mindsets and show opportunity. Those are big bets, but yeah, your analogy is really good, especially when you're running against older sectors and industries. And blockchain will probably start seeing a lot more of this, for example.
Definitely written a few blog posts about the dinosaur mentality and not embracing technology. And in today's world, look at what we're faced with. COVID has broken down a lot of barriers that people had preconceived conceptions of. We can never do board meetings not in person. Now that
Right.
happens, right? We can never raise via Zoom. Well, now it's happening.
Right. My daughter had to send a text of a picture to her doctor. Like that never would have happened. Like they couldn't get Google Hangouts to work or something. He's like, oh, just send me a text.
Yeah. So on the flip side of the best practices, what are some of the red flags that you've seen as an investor or even the experienced executive that you are? Like, what are some of the red flags that you've seen that shouldn't be there?
Yeah, pitfalls and challenges. The big one is shiny new toy syndrome, right? Hard to say no, right? You can't chase everything. And so when you're doing, especially a new go-to-market partnership, you got to prioritize and focus and think through the long-term ramifications. Also, if you're doing an exciting partnership with one of the, maybe one of the big 5 players, everybody wants to get their fingers in it because they're really excited to meet people at Google and Microsoft and Apple. And so you got to kind of like contain the focus. Cross-functional collaboration is essential. Individuals, for example, that drive business development activities, they're in really high risk, high profile roles with very little direct control actually, because they need to convince the product teams sometimes to do something, convince the sales teams that it's a worthwhile investment. The CEO or chief digital officer or chief business officer has to have their back. And any kind of relationship needs care and feeding, right? So how much? I know during this last year, a lot of companies have had this discussion, how much customer success resources do we devote to the care and feeding of our core base to expand the revenue within it, because it got harder to go get new customers. So weighing those research, those decisions, once you have a partner, if you don't really see it through, you're not going to get the benefit of it and you'll just have a bunch of costs. It can also be really difficult to define return on investment on things that don't directly produce revenue right away. So you need to think about, even when you sit down with a partner, what are our goals for this relationship together that meets both our needs, and then being able to communicate that internally, because you're always going to have to sell these projects internally. Those are a few things I can think of. Have you seen any others?
On my end, like definitely, I think it goes back to the culture side of things. Yeah. It's systemic at the roots, where if you don't have the right culture for what you want to execute, no matter how smart the people are, if they don't align with the culture, it's going to show in your communities and the ecosystem that you're building.
We see this a lot now with the distributed offices, right? It's something I think CEOs worry a lot about. If they're not all here talking and communicating and sharing information every day, and some people are here and in Calgary and in Hawaii and in New York with slightly different local cultures, different needs, how do I keep a unified company, right?
Yeah, and there's some that are doing it really well, and they've been doing it for a while. But one of the areas that I'm concerned on with that distributed team is the junior employees, the younger employees, because there's so much that gets absorbed osmosisly when you're in an office. You're seeing other people solving problems or addressing issues. You might not be an active participant in that solution or that discussion, but you're absorbing it. Now those decisions are being made outside of the view of those younger employees. So how do they grow with the company and grow within the company and are able to be promoted through the company because they're embodying what the company wants? They're just not seeing those type of decisions being made, or the non-decisions being made, and how to address them.
Right. Yeah, it is a challenge, and it gets a little outside of the ecosystem thing, but involving them on teams so they get mentored along and see. But it's a new challenge. I think you're asking about 2021. We'll probably see more focus again on how to motivate teams in this year going forward. Is the lights at the end of the tunnel, but we still have to be patient for a while. And how many of these changes will be permanent?
We got a question here. It's kind of tie into this is, so Mighty Capital's built up a 300,000 person PM community. How do you engage with that community? Is it on Slack? How often do you connect? So this is, I guess, similar to remote teams. Like, how do you?
And it's a very tight partner, basically. So it's not part of Mighty Capital. It's a sister organization. Our managing partner, Asima Wadi, who did a fantastic presentation for you guys on exit strategy recently, last year. She started Products Account before Mighty Capital existed. So it's grown over time, and it's a fantastic place for product managers to go and absorb content on best practices, network. They have several, events a year, lots of podcasts, lots of articles. Many PMs go there to build their own personal brand and skills by contributing content. So it's very content rich. We're able to work with our portfolio companies to plug into that network. We'll sit down with them and say, what are your goals this quarter, over the next year, and how can we support it? Who do you need to meet? Do you want to do a podcast on these subjects? What do you really need to get out of it? And programs and playbooks for how to make product managers your champions, how to go to markets. It's a very content rich thing. So it's two separate organizations. They're really tight, within our own ecosystem, quite honestly. It's on my diagrams, it's not quite the core company, but very, very close on that 1 degree removed, because we have a lot of joint collaboration to make sure there are synergies across the line. Yeah.
So staying on this path of best practices that you've seen on Mighty Capital, as you have established ecosystems in your portfolios, company, how do you scale and grow them? Like,
how do you
scale? What are some of the best practices that you've seen deployed specifically through your portfolio or the resources that Mighty Capital has available to it?
Yeah, growth is never linear, right? And so a company tends to grow in stages, and they need to, add to their product roadmap, for example, add to their geographic markets. Scale and growth, certainly establishing partners is a really good way to do it, to add leverage versus trying to do everything yourself. In terms of scaling and growing, it's certainly, we think funding should come about as you enter those next stages of growth. So get in the funding you need to hit certain metrics so you can get the next amount of money to continue to grow. But leveraging, with you in the center of your universe, leveraging your broader ecosystem accelerates your growth. And that's honestly, it's partly why a lot of companies want to establish in the tech centers where you already have strong ecosystems to support that.
Because it is a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, and it's expensive, which is why you raise a lot of money. Yeah. It is expensive to scale and grow, but of course, the more you found product market fit, the quicker you get in your revenue, the more options you have to scale and grow under your own control, right?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to our earlier point of you're thinking about community specific around customers, but you have all these other micro communities that may be easier to focus on and grow, or are totally untapped. And that's why the ecosystem becomes really important, because you can start to see those linkages between your vendors and your customers, but also your lawyers and accountants, then what they can bring to the table, because they're exposed to hundreds, if not thousands of other companies and their ecosystems.
Exactly. They've seen the playbook, right? It can be a really interesting source of information about what they've seen. And, one of our portfolio companies, Fabric Genomics, they're in a really specific space. So they have an AI-driven software platform for labs to quickly uncover genomic insights. So dealing with whole genome sequencing, very rapidly find the variants, which is really important, especially like in a pediatric ward where you don't know what's wrong with the child, and it can take 6 weeks to find out it's a genetic issue. They've had cases where they've gotten it down to less than 24 hours where you get to a diagnosis, which can impact the care decisions and so forth. But anyways, they've always been very ecosystem focused, initially building up roles with universities to build their data lake, working with country genome studies, tech integration partners for how should this stuff be reported up. One of the challenges with AI is how do I productize and automate this and make the data useful to somebody? So, a lot of integration opportunities there. partnering with health systems and labs and pharmaceuticals and sequencing machines. So it's a really interesting example of a company that's not that big in terms of people, but really big when you look at everybody within their sphere, within their ecosystem. And they've built up a cap table of investors. This is really important, whether it's your investors, your lawyers, your accountants. Think about what other value they're bringing you in terms of their networks, and expect value add from your investors on that front. Fabric Genomics has built a cap table full of investors based on who can add value.
Yeah, one of the pitfalls that I see, or missed opportunities I see with a lot of the startups and entrepreneurs, is they don't leverage their boards to the best of their ability, because the board members, again, if you pick them right, they have great contacts, great experience. But if you're not sharing information with them readily, they can't help. Or if you're not actively reaching out to them when you need help.
That's right. And we actually take board seats, usually board observer seats on about half the deals, specifically because we want to be able to do that, to add help. And they want us in the boardroom for that. And, my favorite portfolio companies are the ones where the CEO will send me a long list of things that he or she could use, intros that they need. Do you know anybody at these accounts? So you should totally be tapping into your boards for that, and they should be bringing that value to you.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a few questions here. The first off, what was the name of the organization for the product manager, sister?
Sure, yeah. It's called Products That Count.
Products That Count.
Google that. Strongly encourage product experts, product managers to tap into that, or anybody who wants to sell to product managers. They have programs now too to help companies develop their product management talent, which is great for professional development, because it's one of the reasons SE founded it is it's one of those complicated professions, sort of like business development, where it's not taught in university and college. It's something you learn and develop in your career as you go. And it's usually the VP of product management who has to grow this team's abilities, right? And so it's a great place to get a step up on your career and to meet people within companies you're probably trying to sell to.
Awesome. Here's a question. How do you get your customers in the ecosystem to actually take advantage of partner perks? So there's tons that are out there. You consolidate a great list, but your customers don't take advantage of it. Any best practices that you've seen there?
Yeah, if they don't take advantage of it, and this is a repeated problem, despite engagement with them, pointing out the perks and the advantages, it makes me wonder if it's a perk they care about, first of all. You can't force, if you have to force it, that makes me wonder if it's really the perks that they're looking for. It's always important to understand, like, what's important to you? How would you rank it? What do you value? And if there's a really important perk that they should understand because it'll increase stickiness, that's definitely a customer success issue, engagement issue, to help them understand that.
Yeah, that's definitely one area that we see. So I also run an incubator,
right,
Launch Academy, and so we've got tons of perks, but we call it the "you don't know what you don't know" issue. And so you've got a lot of entrepreneurs, and we throw these perks together that we know will benefit their business, but they don't take advantage of it.
I know. So definitely have to repeat it over and over, and then find a specific opportunity where you can pull them into that perk and it makes an immediate difference, right?
Serge Zoo's got a good comment here. These are not the perks you're looking for. Star Wars throwback there. But the other side I would add to that is that if you as the organization or the customer success managers know that this perk is essential or highly valuable, that's an indicator to you that, okay, maybe there's a campaign or something that can be built around this, or a deeper partnership and relationship with that provider.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. You mentioned the U.S. Treasury. Do you have any thoughts on POCs in government and product-led communities in government?
Well, I guess I did run that gauntlet. I was surprised how easy it was to work with them, but that's because there was a particular individual who was also in the standards group, the ANSI standards group, who wanted to champion this. So whether you're working with government or large enterprise, you have to have your champions. Now, the decision to sell to government is a really big company decision. And whether or not you want to focus on government or add it to enterprise sales or mid-enterprise sales, it's a different sales approach. You're going to have different compliance issues potentially. The way they purchase things is different. But if what you offer is of value to that customer class, it's a fantastic market. And if you have a team that has experience in government sales, for example, I think that's essential.
I think that's definitely a highly undervalued skill set of people that know how to navigate those government circles. Like every government around the world, especially now coming out of COVID, have these localized programs to stimulate their own economy. So Build Back Better in the US. I think Canada's got a similar program, Buy Canadian. And Japan is another one that rolled out some stuff. So it does get tempting because they're throwing these opportunities, but don't be fooled into thinking that it's going to be a cakewalk, because it still is very challenging to sell into government and getting buy-in.
Now, one thing, we found we weren't actually selling to government when I did that, but working with them on it gave us enormous credibility as a security company, right? So working with them can be sort of a validation point that can be valuable for your business, even if they're not actually the end customer.
We got another question here. How do you create a community of B2B users and make them share resources online to move the industry forward? So it's not just centric around your business, but stimulating the industry through your community or through your ecosystem.
How do you do that? Tactically speaking?
Or have you seen examples of others that have done it really well that maybe people can reference?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of, one of our portfolio companies is CERN. They're creating like an AI marketplace. Well, Salesforce and App Exchange, maybe that's a really good example, right? Where they created a community around us. They created an integration point, marketing and conference related stuff to it to create, that community. We see that in open source. We see that in blockchain. So where there's certainly a specific use case and specific set of users that would value from that. In my personal experience, if it has value, it's easy to get the people to come to the table and do it. It's the care and management of that you got to think about, and the rules of engagement and
yeah, and that's kind of where my trepidations are. Like building something for the industry, you're now taking on a role where you can't drop the ball. You have to dedicate resources to that. And if it's not going to have a bottom line impact for you as an organization, how do you dedicate that, especially if you're bootstrapped or if you've got financing and you have to justify the allocations?
Agreed.
But one great way to do that.
Yeah.
But one great way to kind of stimulate that is conferences. And we know this as Traction. I've also got portfolio companies. I'm an investor in Later.com. They've got their conference that's helping the social media industry and social media managers, and Thinkific. It's got theirs that they just launched. So that's a great way to get brand recognition, but also give an outlet for your communities and your industry to get together and share resources and collaborate, where the onus is now not on you to take it further. But you provided the environment, come to the conference, interact with each other, let's build a community together. But outside of just deploying the conference, we don't have to help take those conversations further.
Yeah, I agree. Conferences are a great way, and we're seeing, so many industry vertical conferences or specific technology conferences. Certainly in health tech, we see a lot of that, and security, you see that. So it can be a good way, where often conferences are not about finding customers, but finding that other B2B community and looking for synergies. Even your competitors, are there things you can do together to move a whole class of technology or solutions forward against maybe another common enemy that you share? That's what Symbian was about when I worked for them in mobile operating systems. They didn't want Microsoft to dominate the world of mobile operating systems, but that was a long time ago. So, but yeah, conferences, can be a good way. And if you're the company driving it, it establishes you a little bit as the category leader, and people can fall under your umbrella. That's a nice place to be in.
And that's probably one of the best reasons why you do a conference is brand positioning and giving yourself a thought leader position, but also tying you to other vendors, because like we know this with Traction, Lloyd's done an amazing job bringing these speakers in. That's just reinforced our relationships with those speakers and their companies, because we're seen as the aggregators, but giving those people a stage to share their information and their channels to get engaged. And so it's definitely a very strategic opportunity, but you do have to be mindful of the type of resources that will require, and if you have the network to build something. But the great thing now,
the content is relevant, which you guys do a great job of. We were talking earlier. I went to Traction in Vancouver, I guess, back in the old days, in the old world, and the content was fabulous and definitely a draw. It kept people in their seats.
Yeah, and definitely kudos to Lloyd and Alana for strategizing how we take Traction into 2020 with restrictions and doing these weekly webinars as opposed to trying to do an online one-day conference. This has done amazingly well for us, and the feedback's just been outstanding because of speakers like you and the opportunity to pick your brain in this hour-long conversation. We've got a few more questions we're going to just try to cover before we run out of time here. This one's interesting. There's a new trend around the creator community, Substack, TikTok. You have younger demographics getting out there and trying to engage. And the great thing about something like TikTok and Snapchat is it doesn't have to be super polished videos. These are raw, organic, and they're okay if it's not perfect, but it's tapping into a whole new mindset, but also workforce or younger demographic that's hitting the workforce. Any thoughts on how you can leverage these micro influencers or build a community for the creators that are creating that content?
Yeah, and it depends a little bit about your business model. If you're selling to consumers, it's a clear hit. It is fascinating what's going on there. And I have a high schooler and a middle schooler, and one benefit of that is I stay on the pulse of this stuff. And they were telling me the other day, they're a little suspicious when they're on TikTok and they see somebody my age trying to make a brand cool and hip. They think that's really lame. So you have to be super careful, but of course they're really talented.
Know your audience.
Know your audience. But there's a huge desire to tap into that segment. And I think we're going to see all kinds of great creativity around how to market to that in a way that's effective. We'll probably see more like impact stuff. But yeah, that's an interesting example of a market maker, and how does that fit into your ecosystem? Yeah. One thing about going virtual, everybody's looking for new go-to-market opportunities, new ways to reach customers, and these electronic means are quite interesting. But you have to do it very carefully to maintain authenticity with your user audience.
That definitely is the key. Is these platforms and the audience on them don't hold back when they feel something is not authentic and not genuine.
No, they do not. And sometimes I wonder if the strategy, of course, is to create backlash, and buzz about how stupid something is, because at least then it's in the news, right?
But one thing I would just say about TikTok, I know there's lots of different perceptions of these platforms. I've been on TikTok for probably 2+ years. I don't create content. We are creating some content under Launch Ventures, but like I'm not a TikTok star and I don't plan to be. But the thing that I loved about it was, where else do you see kids in Arkansas dancing to a Bollywood song? You got kids in India lip syncing to a Korean pop song. And so the cultural barriers and the exposure to things without any other preconceived agendas was beautiful. And you're seeing a lot of creativity, anime, people doing cosplay, people showing dance moves, people lip syncing, and just raw, natural, just having fun. It started to get away from that, and you're seeing it be commercialized a little bit. But to your point, you have to be authentic.
Yeah, I watched the Ratatouille thing with my kid on TikTok, and it made me realize how much I miss live performances. It was so well done, actually.
I'm just gonna try to get one last question here. Building an internal community is just as challenging as building an external community. Any recommendations for products or tools that can be used to help with internal communities?
There's so many choices now, aren't there? I'm not on the operations side of our business too much, but I know we're using all kinds of things. Slack is like taken off so incredibly. I do find that a really useful tool. Probably most of you are using it now, and how you can have like sub communities even within it. We're using Airtable for various things. Maybe one caution is not to overdo it. I mean, we're also zoomed out and
Yeah.
just so computered out right now. We're doing fun things like health challenges, and using tools for people. We're using Slack and Airtable, I believe, for people to record how many times they're working out. Like, we've got a bit of a challenge going to create some bonding in this time. That's a really good point. You have to do care and feeding of your own core team and care ecosystem, especially when we're also distributed now.
Yeah, the nurturing and growing it is key in the best of times, and now in the worst of times, when everybody's like got other issues that they got to deal with at home with their kids, and parents being sick or exposed, and you have to be mindful of your internal community, probably more so now than ever.
Yeah, it's been fast. The social change is fascinating. The dogs in the room, the kids in the room, the construction noises, even looking at people's backgrounds gives you a sense of who they are in a different way, right? And I found that part really exciting, actually. Even though I'm sick, I used to love working at home, but now I don't enjoy it because it's so noisy and so full of people. But
all right, Jennifer, this has been an awesome conversation. I really, really enjoyed talking to you and diving into ecosystems and best practices, and also some of the red flags that you've seen out there. A lot of the people in the audience are asking, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, feel free to link in with me. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me. We're always interested in looking at great entrepreneurs going through early growth. I learned something every time I do these. Thank you, Ray. It was a great discussion. Maybe the key takeaways are, do a little exercise. Start with some thinking about, what does your ecosystem really look like today as a company? Where do you think it should look? What should it look like a year from now? And how does that tie to your goals? And if you do one or two things out of that, then I'll feel like I made some kind of impact on your time today.
Awesome. So for everybody, this is Jennifer Vancini from Mighty Capital. Reach out to her on LinkedIn. I want to thank you for the time that you've taken to share your knowledge and experience with our audience. And I want to thank our audience for taking the time to join us on our conversation and listen to what we have to say.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ray. Have a fantastic year.
I need some traction.